Test. Test.
Wait too much longer. All right, good evening. Since 6 o'clock, the Board of Education has been in closed session, and 6 o'clock was a change from the original posted time of 5:30, but the agenda has not changed. And we are in closed session to discuss the employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the district or legal counsel for the district, the setting of a price for sale or lease of a property owned by the district, the sale or purchase of securities, investments, or investment contracts. So please have a motion to come out of closed session.
Closed session.
Second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're in open session.
May I ask permission for Susan Karate, who's at work, to be available, participate in the meeting?
Is that acceptable?
Call her,
Is that acceptable?
No objection.
No objection. Okay, good evening and welcome to the regular meeting of the Board of Education for August 3rd, 2015. Our mission is to educate students to be self-directed learners, complex workers, collaborative workers, complex thinkers, quality producers, and community contributors. Roll call, please.
Board members present: Kristen Fitzgerald, Mike Yench, Susan Price, Terry Fielden, Donna Wankey, and Jackie Romberg.
Okay, so could everybody please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Sorry. First item is good news.
I have one good news announcement, and the beat of the drums outside reminds us that students are back on campus, and the first day of school is just over 2 weeks away, August 19th, 2015. So to all of our students, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Teachers, I'm sure I did. Teachers' first day will be August 17th. We'll have new teachers coming in a little bit the week before that, and we've already been doing some of our professional learning with our new teachers. So I think the beginning of school is always great news.
Okay, next item is public comment. I don't have any cards for public comment. If there's anybody in the audience who would like to make a public comment before the board, you're allowed 3 minutes for an individual or 5 minutes for a group. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to communications.
I do have just a brief report, share with the Board of Education that our second of 3 two-day intensive professional learning for educators on our digital learning initiative was held this past week. Several cabinet members joined many of our high school teachers and pilot teachers from other schools throughout the district for learning. Outcomes of their 2 days of professional learning included understanding blended learning, understanding the impact of personalization of learning and customization of education for students. We focused a lot on digital citizenship. Teachers, we worked with them to build their confidence in preparing students for the one-to-one blended environment and how creating and consuming content can transform teaching and learning in the classroom. Tremendous credit to our learning services team, but also to our participants in the pilot program. Last year, the teachers who participated in previous years were very instrumental in delivering the content. In preparation for digital learning in our buildings, we've also been updating our website with information. So I encourage you, the board, to visit Naperville 203's website and click on the Digital Learning Initiative button in the Spotlight News section. Apparently, we have an old good news item in the notes, So we'll continue to congratulate Dr. Christine Igo, who successfully defended her dissertation. We've congratulated her, I think, a couple of times now. So we'll just keep that in there until you feel awful good about yourself. So that's all I have tonight.
Okay, nothing for President's report. Board of Education reports? None? Okay, on to action by consent. We have two items there, the personnel report and the Lend annual dues. So may I please have a motion for the action by consent?
I'll make a motion for the action by consent adoption of 7.01, the personnel report, and 7.02, the Lend annual dues. And while I do so, can I say how valuable I think Lend has been this past year as the Lend representative and how much work they've done on behalf of our district.
Is there a second? Second. Motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Robert? Yes. Fitzgerald?
Aye.
Wonky?
Yes.
Yench?
Aye.
Price?
Yes.
Fielden?
Yes. Motion carries. Okay, discussion without action. We have 4 items. The first one is land cash value.
Great. The administration has a recommendation to the Board of Education the use of $630,000 of land cash funds to remodel science labs at both high schools. Chief School Business Official Brad Kaufman can provide additional background on this recommendation and answer questions that you have. We would be asking for action at our August 17th meeting.
The only piece of information I would add is this is revolving or ongoing funds. It's not one-time funds. These are collected throughout the, I think, 5 municipalities that we cover. And so the requirement is that these funds are used to service the children that would be coming from those subdivisions. In this case, we're looking to use the funds of both high schools, which clearly covers all students in the district.
Any questions from the board at this point?
Real quickly, I noticed on the next agenda item, we used all the funds in the different category. And this one, you elected to leave $9,891 in there. I just heard you say this is going to be continuous.
Right,
Now,
because we
as far as that goes, is it identified specifically by like a stock sale, that a specific lot is sold for the date? Is that also how you pull the money out? Is it averaged, or how can we make sure that we meet all the requirements of the 10 years?
Right. It's first in, first out.
Okay.
So, and
good
we
enough.
do track it by subdivision.
Now, that was my second question. You said, I don't know what the split is, but you're very confident that the split is going to be legal based on the subdivisions we got this money from.
Yes.
Okay, now you answered my 2 questions.
Do you happen to know what the split by school is? What the proceeds for each of the schools?
No, I could get that though if we track that, so we know exactly how
Okay,
much is
I would-
coming from
I'd be
each one.
interested. Thank you.
Okay.
I just want to make sure I understand, because I know we've just renovated Central and their labs, and I know we've done a whole bunch of work at North too, in their labs, but just I would like that. Thanks.
Okay, we'll have that for next meeting.
Okay, any other questions? All right, moving on to 8.02, life safety funds.
Again, the administration has a recommendation to use $1,025,000 of life safety funds for energy management projects at 4 of our schools. Again, Mr. Kaufman can provide additional background information and answer any questions that the board may have.
Right, now this would actually be closing out a fund due to the fact that number one, we're no longer levying the life safety funds, and 2, the funds or the projects that were identified by the ROE and our architects, those projects have all been completed. And so now this would be one method of using the rest of the funds would be on, could be done on energy efficiency, school safety, a number of things it qualifies for, or it could be returned to the O&M fund, but if so, then you have to abate the same amount of taxes of the funds returning. So if we returned $1 million to the O&M fund, we'd have to abate the O&M fund by $1 million.
Brad, just a point of clarification. When you said this is the architect's report that was generated for the entire district.
Right, from
we
the
can-
life safety survey, the 10-year survey.
All right, 10-year safety is required by law, and all those projects were completed, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Are there any other questions, Mike?
Just to follow up a little bit on what you said, the Well, I do have the question I have to ask. What the heck's a flak fan?
Yes, well, it's kind of funny you asked that question because, because actually I found out that they're actually very much like a jet engine plane. They're very massive fans that operate very similarly, and they have pitch to the blades, blah, blah. Anyway, two of these fans actually push enough air for the entire facilities. And so they're replacing those two fans with 12 smaller fans that can be more, staged when needed to be on, and they're just way more efficient.
So they're taking the big ones out and putting smaller, more efficient
12
ones in.
smaller, more efficient ones in.
Which leads to the second question. I assume, and I figured it would be energy efficiency, all these fit the requirement to be an energy efficiency project to fit under the life safety label. Is that correct?
Right, under law. This is specifically...
Yeah, and they all count for that, even
Right.
HVAC replacement, because it's probably more efficient than the last.
Absolutely.
Okay. No, that's my only questions.
All right, Kristen?
My only question had been, and I had asked it earlier, the question about the different uses for the life safety and why we would select this one, just out of curiosity.
Well, the reason why we selected these projects is these are projects that the district was already wanting to do, and they qualify for these funds, and they're energy funds, so they'll pay back in savings to the district. So
At this point, you don't expect to levy at all, and so the rest of the items that
we
could
have
been
not
negotiated-
levied for life safety since the 10-year study, the study was finalized and we did all the projects, and we've not levied, so the funds have been sitting there for a couple of years now.
So any of the other uses that could have been used for them, that would have come out of the operating funds anyways.
Right.
Anybody else? Okay. Down to policy reading. Section 4, I just have a question before we get started. Do we want to take them individually, going through policy by policy like we did last time?
My recommendation is going to be that we move through these policy by policy so that if you have a specific question about an individual policy, you'd be able to ask at that time.
Jerry, may I just ask a question? I thought I heard you say that the enormity of, I was originally going to ask the question after we talked about it, but I'm thinking about it. I think it might make sense to talk about it beforehand. But the enormity of the sea change we've had in investments, unlike what we're going to approve tonight, there really wasn't a sea change in those related policies. We would then, in the normal course, first read tonight and approve them before school starts, when literally half the town's gone. Would it be possible to have two first reads, and then if there are people in the community that would like to engage, as I said, because there has been a sea change in our investment in what we're doing, in our practice, and then after school, people that would feel they wanted to engage in it, we would approve it in the first meeting in September.
Which policy in particular?
All of
Jackie?
four.
All of four.
Because you want to take it together, right?
We
don't have to.
We don't have to take it
We don't
together.
have
We can
to.
pull out individual policies.
That's fine too. If you want to do that, and
yeah.
just the high sign and the ones you want to
My
pull out.
recommendation would be that
That's
we
fine.
do that.
I
We
have no
move through
problem.
that. We'd indicated, especially like board on policy 430, it may take
Right.
several reads, so
Right.
that's fine.
Right.
Right, I remember
Well, we had-
someone
we
said
had-
that, so.
We had 3 reads last time,
Right.
as reported. But it's a good question. If we're going to pull we can pull 4.3 for delayed action. Any others?
As we go through
As
them.
we're going through, you can pick and choose which ones you don't want to take for discussion
Right.
with action next
Right.
time.
Fine.
So we'll turn it over to Deputy Superintendent Osborne, who's been spearheading our policy review. I know, especially on Section 4, Brad Kaufman will support any questions that you may have as well. So, Kane?
Yes, so as with the other policies we've reviewed, this comes out of our collaboration with press and their attorneys. That's part of the IASB. And so I will go through these one at a time, but certainly Mr. Kaufman is quite aware of in more detail of some of these policies than I might be. 410, fiscal business and management, as it says there, the changes are related to just school board and board of education. As has been raised, and I will review in section 4 before we bring the second reading. It's right here. There are some inconsistencies, and we'll make sure the language is consistent across the board in this section related to changing it to Board of Education. highlights in this section are that it removes the phrase that the budget has to be in by the first meeting in April. There were two parts of that language. It just takes out the first part and says no later than. It keeps the no later than language. There's no intention to change when the budget's brought to the board. That's always up to the board to direct us in that regard. But it just keeps the end date there and doesn't put a front end date. I guess we want to move it earlier, or we want to move it even later up until that end date. The other part is it eliminates just the phrase transfers within funds, and certainly I think Mr. Kaufman might speak to that a little bit more. But the understanding was it wasn't clear what a transfer within funds necessarily means, because there's lots of different budget lines and so forth within a fund that we might make certain kinds of transfers on a regular budgetary basis. And so we thought that was a little unclear what that meant in this context. Questions about 410?
Well, since you brought that up, or should I'll do the administrative thing first before I forget it. Since you mentioned, throughout 4, you said Board of Education. Most of the places it's been changed to the board, just so when I read through every policy over the next, 4 years, what is the standard going to be? Is it going to be the board or the Board of Education? Or, I know they're interchangeable, but it seems like you're trying to go to one.
Well, they are interchangeable and they're both acceptable, but I'm going to have to go back and look, I'll be honest with you, because I walked in the middle
That's
of
fine.
the transformation, and I'll get you.
Because the one you didn't mention that's also inconsistent in here, even with the changes that were made, was school district being changed to the district.
Right.
Now, that one you're pretty sure of, right?
Yes.
Okay. So it's just a question of, is it the board or the Board of Education? And then we're going to pick one and go with that going forward. Nobody's suggesting you go back.
And that change is consistent with what's been directed from press.
No, that's great.
So I need to clarify why it wasn't directed in this section, I'm not sure.
No, that's great. I just wanted to get that administrative thing out of the way. But the next thing you mentioned, which was a question I had about the transfer within funds, and I'm glad the way you put it. What the heck does that mean? So can you give me some examples of specifically what kind of funds transfers you're looking at to make that you don't want approval for, and what an inter-fund transfer may look like that you're still going to need approval for?
Okay, so let's start with the transfer within funds. Perfect example of this would be, for example, when you guys, or the board, approved DLI, that it came along with some continued education for our teachers. Well, that initially was budgeted in Roger's budget within the IT department, but it needs really, personnel needs to be moved over to our, would be through Career 203. So there would be an example of an within fund transfer. So we'd be moving it from the IT budget over to Career 203 for the education of the teachers in DLI.
And the fund in this case they're both in is the education
It's all
fund.
within the education.
Okay. Now, let me give you a counter example. If you have you need some cash and you want to transfer $5 million out of the health insurance fund to the education fund or to the IT fund, or another fund in the education fund, would that now not require any approval from the board?
Well, that technically, yeah, well, it depends on the, because within the education fund, there are several sub-funds.
Mm-hmm.
That's a valid question. That would be, the sub-funds would be cafeteria fund, you already mentioned health insurance, grants, print shop, that's it. So you're right. If we need a fund to transfer, say, from education, the Ed Fund 10 to Fund 12, cafeteria, that would be an example of going from the education to the other. That would be a sub-fund transfer. This policy doesn't really address a sub-fund. My interpretation would be is I would view that as one fund to the other. When I think of within a fund, I'm thinking of like Fund 10, just the specific Fund 10 budget, not going from like Fund 10 to Fund 12 or Fund 16 or something like that.
Yeah, and and I appreciate what you're saying, and I personally don't think I have a problem with that, if I understand what you're saying. But I don't think it's necessarily clear in the language you're proposing how narrow that is. Because, you know,
Right.
your example is perfect. I remember you even discussing that when you presented the DLI. So even though it wasn't necessarily part of the language when we approved the DLI, it was certainly my understanding what you were doing with those funds. You know, I just don't want to see, you know, taking another example, taking cafeteria funds and sending them over to IT, you know, you just, oh, we need to balance the books better, you know, and IT's got way too much money because Roger's so darn efficient, you know, that kind of thing.
Right.
So, I mean, if you're moving it around for valid reasons like that, education, stuff like that, I don't see, and if it, especially small amounts of money, but, you know, the big funds, you know, later on we're going to talk about that for lack of a better term, the health insurance fund is fairly sacrosanct for most board members, and you know, this language, it could be read by a future CFO to allow him to transfer monies without any kind of coordination with the board.
Right.
So, in my opinion, you know, if we could clarify that a little and what your intent is, that would be helpful
Right.
for me personally.
Okay.
I had the same question. I think that would be a good clarification because I wasn't sure which transfers we were talking about with the inter-fund transfers and the transfers within funds.
I think the thing we will clarify the sub-funds so that is also included in the inter-fund transfer. So that's covered by that. But within a fund, not including a sub, the administration would have the authority to transfer within. So otherwise, we'd be coming to the board because, you know.
So we'll keep this as a first read. 410 we'll keep as a first read. Again, next time won't be a decision one, correct?
We'll bring revised language.
Exactly, exactly. Perfect.
I still have a question on 410.
Oh, sorry.
My question was about the first meeting in April for the part of the budget planning. And I understand what you're saying about flexibility. My concern is also looking forward, 10 years down the road with the next administration or whatever, And I talked to Brad. I asked him if there was a rationale for shifting that or if there was going to be a change in our planning calendar or anything. And he said, no, it's working really great. So I don't know. I just guess I'd like to hear from my colleagues and from you, Kane. I understand the idea of flexibility, but if it's working great, I don't want to I don't want to change the language. So then now somebody else will eventually push it back to August.
Okay, well, it's working great because of a consensus, and an expectation. And so that won't change. Because the expectation's not going to change on the part of the board. I think the reason it's in there for flexibility is for many reasons we've talked about. Actually, as financial uncertainty comes from different directions at any given time, bringing forward a budget that's accurate and consistent with what the board expects. If something happens in the interim, I would expect an administration to come to you and say, here's what's happened, we would like to bring the budget to you at this date. Or the board might say, for the same reason, this is happening, can you bring the budget to us here? Not necessarily later either. And so that's why that flexibility is in there. But my understanding, of course, is, as is rightly so, the board can always direct the administration to say, we want you to bring the budget for this fiscal year at this date.
Okay.
That won't change in any way, shape, or form.
Okay.
Mike?
To Donna's point, and I think it's a very valid one, my one concern is, without getting tied down to a specific date, is I don't want to wait till August. I don't want to wait till July. I don't think the board hearing should be any time except when school's in session. And it has to do more with transparency and public availability than anything else. Even if we continue having a dysfunctional state government and we don't know what they're going to do in June, I think we owe it to the community to have those types of hearings that I know are not heavily attended, but one day they might be, while school is in session and we lose, most of our audience. So that's just my opinion. And I understand what you said about flexibility, but I just wanted to go on the
Can I
record
just
for
ask
that.
a question to follow up with that? This year, we held our public hearing at the first meeting in June, each of the, I think 3 years before, maybe before that was the second in June, you made a comment about having when school's in session. Is that a desire?
Well, at the very I said the hearing, but at least we started talking about it when
Right.
Correct.
It was
when
presented.
school was
It
in
was-
session.
Right. I thought there was language, and I can't put my finger on it right now. Is there somewhere there that the board, that will present the budget to the board prior to the fiscal year?
No,
No,
it
there
doesn't
isn't,
say
but that has been our practice. to
Correct.
Not start a new
Correct.
fiscal year without an approved budget,
Right.
not following the state's.
The state's right.
September
Well,
date.
September 30, right. Okay.
And I believe there are neighboring districts not that far away that really don't approve it until very late in the first quarter of the fiscal year.
The next fiscal year.
Yeah. I don't know, I just, the more, we got to start, in my opinion, we got to start talking about budgets while people are still engaged. And that's, you know, what, I don't think we need a hard number, but, you know, I think that should be our emphasis.
So what would you propose doing with that?
I'm just putting that out there for my colleagues and the administration.
Right, but do you have any suggestions that there's a solution? If you're saying that August, should we add a sentence that says it is our intent to continue our practice to finish? Do we need to memorialize this with specific language? Do we need to create something that addresses that? Do we need to change August to something else? I mean, do you have any thoughts on?
I just threw it out there. I mean, I'm not going to oppose anything like that. But as you've heard from my past comments in the last couple of weeks, I don't like to make policies too restrictive.
Right.
But I want to make sure we also, at the same time, have conversations so it's clear and in the minutes what our intentions are. So, I mean, that's, I'm like I said, I'm happy with the policy, if I didn't make that clear, the proposed policy. But I wanted to emphasize that I think we have to keep in mind not only what's happening in the state and the external factors, but also our community should be an emphasis item for us to think about. So if someone wants to propose language, that's fine too, but I don't have anything to
But I think
propose.
part of the goal is to stay with Prest, not just keep having all these one-offs. But I think it's really, in my mind, it's the administration's decision. I really think there's value in having a budget approved before you start the fiscal year. And keeping the community doing it while, at least the hearing process, we look at the budget over 3 meetings. Whether we approve it when they're in session, certainly the discussions happen while school's still in session, my 2 cents, so.
I guess do you need any more guidance on that? Is that helpful?
I don't think so. I think all the things that are being expressed are things that the board has communicated to the administration in the past and we've adhered to.
It's a practice and a comfort, yeah.
Practice, right? I think still the policy recommendations should stay in place, but just as any responsive administration, we should continue to pay attention to what the board's expectations are in regards to when and how to bring a budget forward.
I mean, we like to have 3 or 4 meetings on the budget before we actually approve it, right?
Right.
The policy does talk about a thorough process that needs to take
Right.
place, and that would be part of that.
Yeah, and but if we started the process in May, just as, it's very hard to get to the 3 or 4 budget reviews before you get to the approval. So
I think,
I understand why you struck it. I'm just wondering, looking forward, how does someone know?
Well, I mean, I think the other thing to keep in mind, we always give a budget
Right.
calendar for the entire year,
Yes.
the process from the beginning of the discussions, from setting the tax levy, for having the hearing, the whole 9 yards on each cycle. So that's going to be forthcoming, and that's the way the board, I mean, that is technically approved by the board, and that's the timeline we follow.
So just, sorry. But, so is this something we set in the board planning calendar? As we look at the board planning calendar, do we go ahead and put triggers in there every year?
It's been in there.
It's
Yeah,
been in there.
just,
Right.
but in absence of this language actually being in there, would that be the direction from the board, that we put these metrics in there about when we want to see the budget
Right, in the planning calendar.
in the planning
Yeah.
calendar?
Okay, another thought. If this is our policy, it's something we're going to be comfortable with, why don't we put the expectations of our board in there now? I mean, just an idea to say just exactly what we've talked about. Would that be possible to bring something
So
back and
I
say,
had,
we'd like to talk about it, have the budget approved by the time the fiscal year ends, and also have a couple of budget meetings while the community, while school is still in session,
So
while the community is still engaged.
since we've already had a request to look at 410 over a couple of meetings,
Right.
my suggestion is that we'll come back with two alternates for the board to discuss. One
Perfect.
would be putting some language in policy, and two would be attaching an administrative procedure to this policy that we would annually update. This is the budget calendar for fiscal year to come. And we can provide both those options and then determine at a future meeting based on the board's preference.
Like it.
Okay?
Okay. Because when you actually read the policy, it does say that the real drop dead is still September 30 in our policy currently.
Absolutely, it is now.
So if we were
It's
going to
state
change that, then we would,
Well, it's the state rule.
Right.
But if you say that you can, I don't know that I'd be comfortable saying when we're going to approve it. I'd like the conversation to start, and I'd like to Kane's point, he's saying we have an expectation by the time the fiscal year ends, or the fiscal year begins, and we have an expectation that we talk about it in the school while the community's still engaged and it's not summer session and all that
Definitely.
kind of thing. But yeah, the September, that's the state requirement, so.
right.
The flexibility is also there for the board,
To talk
in
about
case
it and
a new board in the future were ever in a situation where they were faced
You
with a
needed it,
different
right.
decision. Then they might have to go back and change policy as they're trying to address the actual issue that they see before them, so.
Well,
this is-
I think any board can waive policy also. I don't think you have to change a written policy. You can waive policy at any time by a majority of the board.
Correct.
Correct?
You can do that, yeah, that's often not, I don't think the way most boards would prefer to operate, though they'd like to have policy in place that they want to follow. That's why the press recommends the flexibility. That's all I'm pushing for.
Good.
Okay.
To prevent a certain lawlessness from happening amongst boards.
Changing,
Right.
yeah, things on the fly and policy.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else on 410?
Those alternatives.
Before we go on to 415, I'm going to play microphone police. I think we're forgetting to turn them on or move them close enough to speak, and because we are
Good for you.
because we are recording and webcasting and broadcasting our meeting. Let's make sure that they're on and close. Well, that explains it. One of them right there was there. We go. But there were others, Kane, not just yours.
Okay, there we go. All right, 415 is a new policy that is crafted to align with state statute on identity protection, and specifically the proper collection, storage, and use of personal data. So it's whole cloth new.
Go ahead, Christie.
So I guess I'm wondering, you have this, and this came straight from press, is that correct? So you know nothing from you?
We've reviewed it,
Right,
both
but it
HR
wasn't your
and business. No.
Okay, so my question was, what do we use Social Security numbers for? And number two, is this number one right here, limit all activities involving Social Security numbers to those circumstances that are authorized by state or federal law?
Yeah.
Do we want to be taking on Social Security numbers? Do we want the ones, the question of whether or not it's authorized by state law, or do we only want to use them when we are required to use them by state law?
We only, you want to chime in on this first, Carol, and then we can talk a little bit about business, but ideally, you want to limit it as much as possible.
That's what I thought.
We typically only use them for when we need them, like a W-4 when we're hiring people,
Right.
any tax documents, and for our employee benefits, but that's it.
So is that, on those types of cases, we're required to use their Social Security by law, right? Because that's their identifier.
That's correct. We have to have that in order to employ them.
Right. So I'm wondering if, because nobody wants their Social Security utilized, and we don't want to be using it, I think, as what I understand, according to you, unless we have to.
That's correct. And anyone who has access to the Social Security number, meaning within HR or the business office, we at HR takes the responsibility to train and to inform the confidentiality of that number.
Right. So would we want to just limit all activities to those required by state or federal law instead of those authorized? If we don't have other uses that we need it for, we don't really need the broad anything authorized by law, Because that would be a much broader window.
I'd probably want to talk to the person who worked
Yeah.
on this at Press to see what they're seeing as the distinction
Right.
would be in that case, and
Well,
why they chose
I wanted
that
to know
language.
if there were additional things you needed them for, then it would be as authorized. But if it's not.
We'll get Press's counsel on this and then review it with our own counsel.
Moving on. Any other questions?
Any other questions on 4.1?
5.
4.15, sorry. Yeah. All right, next policy then is 4.20.
4.20, previously transfer of funds, which is renamed fund balances under press recommendations. You can see the new language there. Additionally, there was a question because we did go ahead and include language from 440 on the 10% guideline that we use. There was a question about redundancy. We did put it in there. We are aware that it's redundant. We just simply thought that when looking at fund balances, it was important to reiterate that this is the board's policy on fund balances, since this is a short and succinct policy on that topic.
Any questions? Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I normally don't like things repeated exactly the same. I understand what you're saying, though, and if the rest of the board wants it, I'm not opposed to it, but as a rule, I think that's redundant. But the other question is, which applies to this and 440, and some of the reports we've been giving, including the one I believe here, it talks in more detail about what cash is. Now, I see where you exclude the health insurance fund. I think it's in this one also.
Mm-hmm. It is.
But we don't talk about what cash equivalents, or CDs would be as far as the cash thing. And once again, as we just touched upon, it's not just for the 15 of us in the room. It's also for future boards and future administration. So, I mean, they can change it down the road, but we want to be absolutely clear on what our intentions are. So I'm wondering, in your concurrent report, you actually address some of this. I don't think it's too verbose. Would it be helpful to the board if we added some of those extra definitions in on what cash is, or is it too much? I yield to Mrs. Romberg.
Well, I think the worrisome thing here for the district is that when you say you're in cash balance, those are greenbacks, boy. That is liquid cash. Those aren't cash equivalents. That's not commercial paper. That's not 30 days. That's cash. So if that's what you mean, great, but defining it might give you a little bit more latitude.
We'll come back then with language that will stipulate what the definition of cash is for the purpose of that policy.
Yeah, whatever the consistent.
Well, I think you
Well, I think we need to answer
Yeah.
the first question is should it be redundant? And strictly, technically speaking, this doesn't exactly define fund balance. It defines an operating reserve, which is not, this is not the equivalent of fund balance. However, it is an appropriate title for it to be in that section, but if there's another section that is already covering it, then I think we should answer the first question about the redundant. Right.
So why don't we just keep it in 440, and we'll put definition of cash as discussed in the memorandum.
Okay.
In 440, so our change will be to 440.
So then it will end after borrowing money?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
So essentially, the second. Arrested myself. We'll strike the second paragraph.
Yep. Okay.
Okay.
430 is revenue and investments. I won't have anything particular to add. The board's already had one reading of this informally last board meeting.
Yeah, I'll speak to some of the changes that are in there right now from what was presented at the last Board of Education meeting. The consensus of the board, what we took away was that you felt that the policy was sufficient as it was. So a recommendation I see, we have again one of our formatting issues with numbers here. So we'll clean that up for next time. I apologize for that. by changing the order of priority. As listed in the press model, at rate of return 3, diversification 4, put diversification ahead of rate of return, and add the words in order of priority. And then you see the other changes there. So Brad or I can answer questions you have.
Any questions?
You want to go first? You still studying? My only question was, let me see if I can find where it is. I thought it was in here. Least quarterly. Trying to think, and maybe, was this the one that had the 12 and the 24-month reports, or was it a different one, am I thinking?
Yes, it's the
This
second
is-
item under liquidity.
Brad can speak to that.
Because, yeah, I was wondering why 24 months, you know, because I would think and I didn't bring this up last week, and was it last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever it was, because we've had so many board meetings lately. 24 months, we go through a budget process, obviously, every year. I would think at a minimum, we would need an updated cash flow going into any budget discussions. I don't know if that's the annual plan you have, or in this case, the biannual plan. But I'm just wondering where the 24 months came from, because you've developed now a very, I think, useful cash flow, which, you know, depending if you call it cash flow or a cash reserve policy. But, you know, something along those lines, I think, is important during the budget planning process.
Well, I answered. I don't see, I actually was just looking for it. Oh, it's stricken here for the 24 months. The purpose or the idea behind it is not that it would be prepared annually. Cash flow needs to be prepared annually, but we wanted to cover a 24-month period. So it's not that we were going to only prepare it every other year.
Oh, you're right. I misread it. Sorry.
So, right.
I fixated on the actual numerals. So after reading 30 of these policies, I apologize for that.
No, that's fine.
What was the other thing? Go ahead.
Go ahead, Kristen.
Go ahead. Because I probably don't want to make another mistake.
Okay. All right, I just have a couple of questions. So we had a proposal last week that was, well, it had some suggested changes, and there was some dialogue about the changes being too finite or too specific. And I think that the reordering has helped a lot in terms of being able to make some additional direction beyond the initial objectives. My question is, I know we've talked a little bit already about the the portfolio and, does it meet policy, et cetera. Do you have enough specificity in what you have here that not just this board, but the future boards will interpret this correctly so that we are not in a situation where it is just a misinterpretation that puts us in a question of violating policy? Do you see what I'm saying? So I agree completely with my colleague's original statements last week about, or whatever that was, last week or 2 weeks ago, about making sure that we don't want to hamstring them. We don't want to have too many things, and especially to the extent that the portfolio's value goes up and down, and so they're not able to really be valid. But at the same time, I also want to ensure that we have here what every person's read would be on what we have, what we need to meet. You know what I'm saying? Because we don't want to have it be a situation where we aren't able to do it just because we don't understand it or there isn't enough guidance. Do you see what I'm saying?
I still think that we should have an administrative policy to go along with this that does provide maybe some of that additional specific guidance. Because, do I have enough? Yes, I have enough because I've lived through the last 8 months. So I have a different knowledge and perspective than I did 8 months ago. And I think but a new person coming in wouldn't have that. So that's where I would want to do an administrative procedure to go with it to capture these things that I think are important, but yet wouldn't be in board policy.
Going to answer a little bit differently. I think this policy and language in this policy gives adequate and clear guidance to us moving forward.
To you,
It's hard to speculate what it may mean, how somebody in the future may interpret it. If that is an interest of the board, we can look at some of the language that we have removed that was originally in here as a guideline, of a procedure. But I think the policy is sufficient.
Donna.
So I know that you said you're going to renumber these, but under the investment objectives, it is in the order of priority. So I guess I want to understand how you're going to renumber them because that makes a difference for the priority.
1 is safety of principal, 2 is liquidity, 3 is diversification, and 4 is rate of return.
that's not what they say.
The order is right. He said the numbers.
Yeah,
were
that's, it was a formatting, yes.
Something
when
must
we-
have happened in the, it's
When
just,
we, when we put the
they're listed in
document
order of priority
together.
right now. Ignore the numbers, we'll make that correction.
Okay, go ahead.
Now,
So we switched the diversification and rate of
We did
return?
that in the last
That was
time
the
we-
conversation of the board at the last meeting, correct?
That's what happened, the priority changed in our last. The sense of.
go ahead, Mike.
Back to Kristen's point, I certainly empathize with it, but, and she remembers what I said a couple weeks ago. When I opened up the proposals last week, I can once again see why, actually, I agree with Dan about, I think, first of all, I think it was adequate anyway, and I think we strengthened it without too much verbiage. But on top of that, when I look at the stuff that was cut out, we were looking at the specific bond ratings. We were looking at a downgrade in a specific amount of time. Percentages down to the percentage, down to the month, down to the years on how much we wanted to hold, how much, for how long. Then even further, we were going into how much would be an appropriate amount based on the type of bond, which varies tremendously if you have $5 million to invest or $40 million to invest. So that's why basically everything we took out were specific numbers, which I would probably object to no matter what we did. Now, if there is something that, in the spirit of general guidance, that makes it even clearer, I would certainly consider that, and I know we're going to talk about this a couple times, but I right now, I am comfortable with the second row of changes they've made, i.e. compressing the changes or, deleting a lot of them, and I think, as a reading, I think it's very clear on what the intentions are. If there's more clarity that the majority of the board wants, I mean, I don't mind that at all, but I have trouble sensing what that will be. So if somebody brings something up as an example, in 2 weeks, I think the rest of the whole board would be willing to look at it. But I don't know if you want to get online and offline and maybe you have some suggestions, but I'm very happy with their latest product right now, but we can always improve it. I got no problems with that.
Go ahead, Jackie.
I just had one real quick question under this policy under controls and report, and I think this goes just my colleagues, and I'm trying to make sure this is for years to come, not just right now. But the chief, second paragraph, the chief investment officer shall provide at least a quarterly report. Haven't we sort of decided that these are going to be monthly reports? So why don't we just say monthly? And then just keep it simple. If somebody doesn't want them to be monthly, once you embark in them, I think you don't have them 1 month and then not for 2 months, 2 business meetings, and then show up again. Just a thought.
Well, just an observation. I think the requirement was always in quarterly.
Correct.
And, but we always got
gonna
monthly,
say,
quote-unquote,
we-
investment reports. Now, the question becomes is, do we want a full-blown verbal investment report every month? I'm not saying we don't.
Right. So
I think that's the difference between taking, making a separate agenda item for a quarterly investment report
Right.
and having some PowerPoint slides versus
Right.
just having the data available for questions. I'm happy with
Well,
either
and
one.
I guess as long as, and I guess in my opinion, I feel like there has been a sea change. We're not just into commercial paper and cash and CDs. So if that's not the case and we're into a new world, great, because we're trying to we have some different objectives. And because of that, I'm trying to react to that in the policy, and I think why not say monthly? In the old world where nothing changed and everything was stagnant, quarterly's fine. In the new world, I think that we're trying to get smarter and especially when you put, you change mark to market. To do that once a quarter, you're like, you could have missed this. You could have missed the Queen Mary. So my thought would be do monthly. You can have other things, but the regular report, the one, the report that Brad said there's, lots of columns to add to. That's the one I'm thinking of when I'm reading this.
So just one of our original drafts did strike out quarterly and have monthly.
Oh, of course it did.
So because of what Mr. Yench said, monthly we were providing the written report. I took it as quarterly we would provide slides up on there, a little bit more detailed conversation. But I would agree, going back, our practice has been monthly investment reports. Let's just change it to monthly.
And if I could just add one more thing to that, in just thinking out loud, my only worry with monthly, and I'm not saying it's a bad idea or I'm necessarily against it, my worry is like so many other things, like quote unquote our investment reports up till a couple months ago. If you have a monthly report in there, month after month after month after month after month, people tend to not read it. By having a quarterly detailed report, however that's worded, now you're forcing people to think about it and look at it on a quarterly basis, which may be a more appropriate timeline for us. Just a thought. I am not necessarily rising in opposition to what you said.
I guess I would rather see it monthly and put the onus on the board members, and then if there's some high points that our superintendent, like downgrades, I'm not, it says in here the superintendent will be advised of downgrades. That's great, and he can then decide when it's appropriate and when to get the board involved. So, I don't, just everybody, we're all kind of going the same way, which is good.
We're just processing.
Yes, we're processing.
Is it a series of monthly reports followed by a summary of a quarter report from quarter to quarter for the deltas to draw attention to those aspects that have changed? Because
I don't want to tell them what the report should
Saying
look
both? Are you
Say-
saying both?
Well, I have to agree that if you look at something month to month, it doesn't change much. It's a little bit difficult.
I guess the thought would be, Terry, let's leave that to the superintendent.
Yeah,
to
I have some
effectively
thoughts on what, I
communicate.
think I hear the interest of
Yeah.
the board. I'll work with Kane and Brad. We'll put some
Right,
language
as
together. We'll
opposed
do our
to
next
us
read
dividing.
at the next meeting, and we'll react to that.
Right.
I think we have a sense of what you're looking for.
Go ahead, Kristen.
So I'm looking again at the 1 through 4, the new 1 through 4, and I absolutely agree with the specificity in many of these, the numbers, et cetera. The one area where I wondered about particular, because we've added a lot to liquidity. We have definitely added some definitions there, and we're getting more information to be able to tell what our needs are with regard to liquidity. We have improved safety of principal quite a bit because we put it at the top and said it's our number one goal. And we put rate of return at the bottom. So maybe safety was already there. It was.
Safety was
okay,
at the
but
bottom,
regardless, we put rate of return at the bottom. So we got those kind of balanced out. I think my lingering question is diversification. And that's my question where I am wanting to make sure that we have what we need in that policy or an administrative guidance, whatever it is, to make sure that it's not just in the eye of the beholder, going forward. Absolutely, you have the guidance that you need, and I agree. We don't want to make it too specific, and we don't want to make it, necessarily administrative or unnecessarily administrative, but I just want to make sure on that particular one that we are where we want to be. My other question is, I like how you've kept, comment and question. I like how you've kept some shortened things from what we had talked about before in the sections with regard to controls and reports. You've shortened that up quite a bit so that it's not quite so specific, but I do have a question. In that, I know you're determining whether it's going to be quarterly or monthly, et cetera. Do we want to have, whether it's meeting the investment objectives, identifying the securities, including mark-to-market, identifying the institutions, including relevant information, do we want to have or consider any assurance that it meets our policy guidelines? We've got new reporting, we're changing and investing at different, I would assume, going forward in the future that we will be changing and investing, making sales, et cetera. Is that something we would want to consider putting in those reports that we've certified it's meeting our policy guidelines according to diversification? It's just a question.
Well, let us take a look at a couple of things to both of the points that you've brought up, and then we'll bring that back at the next meeting.
Okay, any other questions on policy 4.3? And again, we're not, we're going to bring this back for one more time for discussion without action before we take discussion with action. On to policy 4.4.
4.40 is on incurring debt. And I think the highlights here, as I note in the memo, it adds a provision to establish a line of credit with a bank or other financial institution. And I don't know if Mr. Kaufman has anything else to add to this. And the formatting on the numbers is, of course, incorrect, and we will have that fixed for the next reading.
So the only thing I would add in there is that we've heard conversation when we talked about 420 about putting some of the language from the memorandum that's provided on 440 for the definition of cash. So we'll look at that and where that fits in 440 for next time.
Great.
Okay. 445, insufficient fund check simply replaces responsible with authorized in terms of the people who are authorized to address that.
I'm sorry. 440, we're done. I'm sorry, which were you just on?
I was on 445,
There's
insufficient
another
fund
report.
check.
There's 440, 10% cash reserves. That's the old. Are we not? So you were just, that was just the schedule?
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay. Got it. Got it.
Any
Any questions on
about
445? Okay,
450, payment procedures, has been revised, really adding things in that more accurately reflect our current practice. Any questions on 450?
questions?
Did you make any changes since this afternoon on this one?
On 450, no.
Okay, I guess I don't have any.
Anybody else?
Okay, no, Dan answered that for me. Okay, thanks.
Okay, 4.60.
4.60 just revises this language so the management of contracts are more generic versus specific and task-oriented, still aligning to statutes so regular revisions of amounts is not necessary. In other words, it directs that the policy will align with statute so that when the statutory amounts change, we're required to then change the policy to meet that, or change the practice to meet that because we'll be aligned to statute. If we keep the amount in there all the time, then every time the law changes, we have to change the policy.
Any questions on 4.60? 4.70?
4.70, we did not believe that the press changes were appropriate to adopt. We thought they were far too specific for policy. Instead, we think that it's the best course to keep our existing policy in place and to also meet the requirements of the school code if economically feasible in regards to this piece. It doesn't mean we would ever be out of compliance with the school code, but the school code, as you know, has recommendations. It doesn't have necessarily requirements in this regard. Some things it does, green schools, issues around cleaning sometimes. But the point is here, we would attempt to be as conservation-oriented as possible in economically feasible terms. Otherwise, the specifics of the press recommendation could suggest or incur costs that we're not prepared to undertake.
Questions or comments?
Well, I think you hit upon it, is,
You
one
need extra
reading
word.
this could say, Which will, at a minimum, meet the requirement of school code if economically and practically feasible.
Oh.
And if you read
Right.
straight through that, it's like,
You're right.
what the heck?
Yeah, never
If
mind.
that's kind of, that costs a lot of money, we're not going to do it.
Yeah.
Heck with the school code.
Yeah.
I know you just said that's not what you meant.
Right.
But a casual
Said English
reading of that
language.
would
Yeah.
It's the comma.
suggest that. That comma may make all the
Yeah, if
difference,
it's in
I
the
get
world.
it,
Right.
but
I'll look
English
as a way to revise that language so
If we should change the order,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
change the order,
Right.
that's all it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Put it
change
up
the
at the
order.
top.
but meet the requirement of the school code last.
Yeah.
Okay.
4.8,
you take the next.
4.8, accounting and audits.
Oh, this is yours. You love this. Accounting. Audit.
4.8 on accounting and audits, and certainly Mr. Kaufman can speak to questions in this regard. But you can see from the memo, it expands the scope of the policy to include annual financial reporting, taxable fringe benefits, and internal controls specifically.
Questions?
These are press recommendations. I'd have to go back and see. I don't know if Brad remembers if he had any specific additions or changes to this. We go through a process where cabinet members review the press recommendations and can often then bring back additional edits or changes too. I don't always track the difference between those changes by the time we get here. And this was months ago that we did this, so I'd have to look at my notes to see. I don't know, Brad, if you recall.
I recall making one minor adjustment to this, and that was in the first paragraph, which read, it was talking about starting there with determining of liability assets, and then it had something else about something of expenditures that made no sense.
Mm-hmm.
So we changed it to reporting of expenditures and revenue in the
Correct.
governmental funds.
And the only thing I'm thinking of as that I didn't do when I read this originally is go back to your audit engagement letter, which is what you're bound to with your audit, and to see if those things are in here, because that would be important. But I'll do that, and this is our.
We'll take a look at
Okay.
that too. Yeah.
Perfect. Just so they're not inconsistent, I guess.
Right.
That's all. So our policy's consistent with the
With the language we use in that
engagement letter.
document.
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
Any other questions or comment on 4.8? Jumping up to 4.100. Jumped by 20.
Okay, you'll just have to give me a second. 4.100. Have to open up the memo here because didn't get page 2. It's on insurance management, and you can see the strikeout changes there that are attempts to streamline the policy and add new requirements for catastrophic student accident insurance, which we already are in compliance with. And it includes the home and school referred to in regards to the indemnity.
Would that include all, I'm sorry, I have a question. Would that include all other volunteers? What does building affiliates mean? So volunteers acting on behalf of General Home and School or SFCP? You know what I'm saying? Or do we have to be that specific since you have General Home and School, or does building affiliates cover anyone else?
It says volunteer personnel, including but not limited to. So, in other words, it's including
Okay.
these. We call those
Yeah.
out, but it's not
Right.
Yeah.
limited to just
Yeah.
them.
Okay.
So
That's
it would
fine.
be
Yeah.
somebody we
Yeah.
we deemed acting on our behalf.
Sorry,
in
thank you.
some regard.
I didn't catch that phrase up at the top. Thank you.
Why is, I'm sorry, excuse
Go
me.
ahead, go ahead.
Why is catastrophic accident insurance limited to grades 9 through 12? Because we have school supervised interscholastic athletic, I know, is that on? We do have school sponsored and supervised interscholastic athletic events in our junior high.
Right. I mean, the reason why this is specifically, press wrote this and corresponding to the new school code that was passed, and the new school code is specifically 912. Football is a major issue, and covering this new law causes the health or insurance companies to now pick that up, whereas before they weren't. So this was specifically written in response to the state law.
But it doesn't negate your question.
Right, we play football in junior high.
Right. Well,
Should we be adding?
I don't think we could get a writer to write it. I don't think insurance policies would carry it. We could, if we put it in the policy, if we're going to need to, if you wanted to have that, we'd need to investigate to see if that's even possible to write a policy to cover that.
So we're saying the catastrophic accident would only, we're saying it only happened in high school, which you
Microphone.
can't say that, right?
No, we ha-
Microphone.
Well, it's on. I'm just not near it.
You gotta be
I'm loud
near
enough.
it. No, you're not.
I
You
agree
think
with
you
Susan's
are.
question. I would be concerned that we have athletes competing at junior high in the same sports that cause these injuries, and actually, it can be running, it can be shot put, it can be, well, I think that just happened at one of the DVC schools. Somebody hit somebody with something. It was junior high.
It was a bat, wasn't it? So what is this about football? So now what's happening?
Well, it's not just, it's 9 through 12, it's mandatory coverage. That this would be additional coverage above and beyond anything the district would be carrying or we're carrying it, or above anything parents would be carrying. So realizing we right now have from EC through, connections, we have liability insurance that covers us in case of anything, a piece of equipment malfunctions, a person acting willfully, to harm, any of that. Plus, we offer, but only if parents take it, we offer individual student accident insurance that parents can take. All right, that's the coverage we currently have. This is an additional coverage that sits on top of that catastrophic coverage. So if the parent chose not to take the individual student health insurance and did not have insurance of their own, and the child was injured, they would then have this catastrophic that would kick in if there was no other insurance available to cover that item.
And we're required by law to have 9 through 12.
Right, that's the new law that was addressed
And if
for
we,
high
but if
school.
we expanded it to 7th and 8th grades, where we do play football and other sports and activities, that you're saying that would become,
Well, we would need to check to make sure that we could get a writer to cover that. I mean,
Let us get the information from our insurance
Okay.
carrier and report back to you at our next meeting. We'll
All right.
add this to the list of ones for additional readings.
thank you.
4.110.
Transportation, this policy clarifies use of strobe lights, inspections, and it aligns to statute.
Any questions?
Yep.
Go ahead.
Yeah, my question was going to be, who wrote this, the General Assembly or press? Because what the heck does it mean? I mean, they're not allowed to have their strobe on all the time. They have to have it on when there's at least one kid in the bus, but outside an urban area when they're stopping. Are we an urban area? Or are we
I would have to
suburban?
find out.
It's unincorporated, there's not a sidewalk.
Yeah, what the heck does this mean? I assume you copied it right from press, and they said it's due to the law. So we got two.
It is due to the
groups.
law. It's one of those laws that's designed for, press recommends, the statute says it doesn't necessarily apply to every district that has buses. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
So,
We'll get the specific citation on this one. I'll keep this one on the list of potential action, but
I'm
we'll
just, it
we'll get the
reads
specific
kinda
citation on
silly.
that particular part on where it came from.
It sounds like it might be like when they're driving home or something like that. That's what it looks like. It would always be bearing one or more students if they were being
Yeah,
used
I'm not
as a
going to
bus.
venture a guess. We'll get the specific citation and, yeah. It could be fun.
For 120.
4120 is simply related to food services. It adds the requirement for food or beverages to meet USDA guidelines as appropriate.
Go ahead.
Once again, is this, I guess, press recommended language?
Yes, it is.
So if we go to a program that doesn't follow the NSLP, then we're not required to provide nutritious, well-balanced, or age-appropriate meals? And conversely, do we do that now? Because I guess we offer them, but I know a la carte, you can walk out of that with as far as I know, you can walk out of that with a Gatorade, a cookie, and French fries. And I'm not sure anybody would consider that nutritious or well balanced. So I'm guessing, is this just eyewash to make somebody happy, or does it mean anything? Is it supposed to mean anything?
Well, I will, go ahead.
It is specifies if the district participates in the school breakfast program or the national school lunch program, then those things hold, and we do have to offer them, and they have to reflect the food and nutrition requirements of the Department of Agriculture. So there are kind of lots of ifs there. If we're in it, we need to do the following things. It doesn't mean we can't also offer the things that you mentioned. And so this policy could stay in place even if we were not part of the National School Lunch Program. It just says that if we are, we need to do the following X, Y, and Z.
And it specifically for this, it applies only as part of a reimbursable meal. Is that correct? So it wouldn't account for, it wouldn't apply to like a la carte menus?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Because that all runs through that program. The reimbursable part's running through the program.
Okay.
Any other questions? 4.2, 1.2, 4.130.
4.130, there are no revisions proposed to this, so you'll see current and proposed being the same thing. It's simply for board review.
Questions or comments? Okay, 4.140.
4.140 is the waiver of student fees. It adds language about notification, identifies additional eligible criteria when appeals are considered. It just adds those criteria. It does not limit it to those criteria when appeals come forward.
Questions or comments? Kristen?
So in order for someone to get the fee waiver, they have to apply. So basically, and this is current policy, I get it, but you don't automatically receive that. If they're on free, if they've gone through the process of applying for free and reduced lunch, they also must go through an application for a fee waiver.
I'm going to defer to Brad.
No, we actually, we use the free and reduced lunch application as the application. This policy would allow if the district, if the board ever chose to have a separate standalone policy, and it is allowed by law, but our current practice is that that application qualifies for both.
That's what I thought. So this would be confusing then, to have the policy reference.
You're talking about under verification?
No, what it says in this policy is that a person who is unable to afford fees may receive a waiver.
Mm-hmm.
So you're just saying, well, then should we just clarify that that stands as our fee waiver application? Because otherwise, reading the policy, it would seem as if, in addition to what we just went through on the free and reduced lunch guidelines, they would need to do something else, right?
We
Wow.
inform them that it's the same thing, so.
Right, so
Right,
like
but it's the
that
policy
1,
that's
2, 3.
confusing.
The third paragraph down says students receiving receiving a fee waiver. Oh wait, no, I'm sorry. Right, eligibility of criteria. It says use the federal free and reduced meal program. So we specify. So this
It's just confusing to me to read it. I
Okay.
agree with you that you're saying that you get a fee waiver when they're eligible, but the way that it's written at the top makes it sound as if that's a separate process that they would go through and that could be denied at the bottom.
Well, first of all, the law allows that you can have such a process, you can have such a distinction, and this policy makes that distinction possible if that decision were ever made to do so. Currently, the practice is that when you are eligible for free and reduced, and through that process, you're made eligible for fee waiver. Your fees are waived.
So, I mean, in a world where we have more than 17 or 18%, future boards could have to make a distinction between fee waiver and free and reduced lunch.
Correct.
So we're trying to.
Yeah,
I
and
see.
this policy, as part of it did before, makes that possible, but it doesn't bind you to doing it, as is the practice now. We currently make students eligible for fee waivers once they have submitted the paperwork for the free and reduced lunch waiver.
I definitely get it. And I see that the current and the former policy did the same exact thing. It's just, it does still seem, and I get that you'd want to have the flexibility. I guess I still think it's a little tiny bit confusing that it's talking about a waiver that they don't actually have to go through the process of going to get, at least
Well,
currently.
Yeah, but they might one day.
They might, but they go through a process, and
Right.
that process
Yeah.
counts as, right? So they're already going through that process. We're just counting it,
Okay.
right? And on the ground, it's very straightforward because once they've done one, they've done the other, basically, so.
Any other questions or comments?
Okay, 4150, facility management and building programs. Removes board approval for building alterations greater than $5,000, adds the requirement to update the board annually on facility needs and to minimize environmental impacts, as stated in the memo.
Questions or comments?
So again, we have a numerical formatting issue on this one, we'll correct.
Okay. 4160.
Hazardous and infectious materials is changed to environmental quality of buildings and grounds. So people don't think strictly of hazmat suits when they think of this policy. And as you can see, it just adds more details regarding application of pesticides. We were really in compliance with this already in our practice, and the language is just catching up.
Questions or comments? Okay. 4170.
4170 on safety is largely also a matter of what we're currently doing in terms of practice. In terms of the law enforcement drill that's already in place, the Movable Soccer Goal Safety Act, those are already in place, and it clarifies policy on sex offenders' permission to be on school grounds.
Questions or concerns? Go ahead.
This meets all the guidelines you have for child offender notification, all that. Okay, perfect.
Yes,
I figured it did, but
Yep.
wanted to ask.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Can you just clarify a point for me, Brad? How does the offender receive permission from the school board to be on the grounds?
How's it received?
Or if they're not supposed to?
Permission to be-
if
Well,
they've been.
Well,
School board superintendent or superintendent's designee.
yeah, so how is that, I mean, how do you?
Well, it's
how
an
do you-
or statement, so they're usually not going to come to the school board.
Yes,
So If they were, they would do it probably in writing.
So
Seeking
if
that
somebody were
permission.
expelled, or somebody was an alternate placement and they wanted to come back to do something, they'd have to check in with.
This is regarding child sex offenders.
Right. Specifically, I mean,
Yeah.
but, so if there was,
So wouldn't the
I-
judge be the principal?
yeah, well, I guess,
That's correct.
and this would apply to like a parent or guardian that may have been convicted of a crime who wants to attend a evaluation.
Parent-teacher conference.
Parent-teacher conference. And at that point, that person would be supervised continuously?
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay.
4.171.
There's no change. There's no press version for this policy, so we included it for review.
Yep, go ahead and run down the ones we're going to come back over.
Okay, so if you can just stay with me for a minute, I'll try to go slowly. I have listed a number of policies here that the board has requested additional read before we ask you for action. So I'm going to list for you the ones that I have noted as a more war work, additional questions, something, come back as a discussion without action on August 17th. The ones I don't refer to, we will be asking for action on the 17th. Okay? So these are the ones that will not, these will be for further discussion. 4.10, 4.15, 4.20, 4.30, 4.40, 4.100, 4.110. I'm actually going to go back up to 4.20. I think we addressed that by eliminating the redundancy, and it gets answered in the other one. So we will bring 420. Okay, I guess I didn't get you. Is that we can do that?
No.
4.8.
4.8, you want it for an additional read, or you want us to just provide that documentation?
Okay, we can do that. Okay. Kane, did you have any others that I missed? So say them again. 410, 415, 430, 440, 480, 4100, 4110. Kristen?
I just have a question about a memo included in this about the application of policy 4.40. Will that be additionally then discussed in the next meeting?
Yes.
No, it's the memorandum. We did not discuss it, so I'm just clarifying that the discussion on that. Do you want? Are we discussing that currently, or are we?
I
going
guess
to
we can do it
discuss
either way. We can bring it back with the next read. We're going to take some of the language and incorporate it into policy 440 also. So maybe it would make sense if we did that simultaneously.
Any other questions on section 4 of policy 8.03? Okay, move on to item 8.04. First reading, access to computers and electronic networks.
Okay, I'll just turn it right to Kane.
Okay. We're bringing this policy forward now kind of ahead of the schedule that's been set because as we went through developing the digital learning initiative and the rollout of one-to-one, there's a policy of review and guidelines that go along with that, and 6235 is the most relevant one. So what we did is we did start with what's in press and use much of what's there, but already a team of people involved with the rollout of the initiative had started working on guidelines and policy-related items. So their language and recommendations have been incorporated into this policy revision recommendation. To say that it's too extensive to go over might be going a little bit far, but there is a lot of language that's added that is really up to date to address schools going one-to-one particularly. So I'm really happy to just answer any questions related to this. I know there have been some already related to the rollout and things like filtering, and those are details that aren't always laid out in the policy in terms of what's filtered, what's not filtered in specific detail. But generally, those things are listed when you look at language related to appropriateness, obscenity, and so forth.
Any questions or comments? Kristen?
So you're right. There's tons of stuff in this policy. It's huge. And I want to compliment you on all the work that went behind the policy, because I know that there's a lot of things that the district, Rogers Group, has put together to make sure that we are able to meet our primary concern of the safety and welfare of the students in terms of accessing appropriate content. And I think that I had some questions which have been answered for me in terms of what do we mean by disabling the filtering device? So I've got that one in terms of the bona fide research, and it is my understanding that at-home filtering applications cannot be disabled, correct?
That's correct.
And my only question remaining is with regard to the signatures required in the policy. We have required that students and parents, let me get to where I was. Oh.
Yeah, there's one word that probably needs to be changed for the and/or parents probably should be based on the situation.
Right. So that was my question that I had is I understand that we have a protocol going forward where we would have children or students 9 through 12 would sign on their own, and E through 8 would have the parent signature instead of the child. Correct. So my question was, and I don't have a 9 through 12, so I don't know what other things the kids sign on behalf of everyone. But is that enough that we have the student signing alone, not the student and his or her parents in some grade levels? Is it enough notification for the parents of what the guidelines are? And are we able to have the student speak for everybody in that case?
I'm going to draw a parallel for you.
Yeah.
The student discipline handbook would be another one where we have the parent signed off on, or not the parent, the student. If the student registers themselves, they sign off on having received it. So this would be, I think, similar to that.
Okay.
So, already when we look at the enforcement of policy 7190, that's the practice we have in place. I think we, as I referred you to the website, we are really loading a lot of content and information
I get that.
out there. So I think, I'm comfortable with this.
And a Talk 203 has already gone home to accompany one registration process that's underway that communicates exactly what's in that sign-off, and that sign-off includes a large portion, not every single thing that's in here. It refers to the policy, but it has a large portion of the content. So,
And I'll add, starting tomorrow morning, students would not receive their Chromebooks at North without turning in the signed form. So without that form, we wouldn't distribute.
So tomorrow's freshmen, but this Talk 203, because kids will go on their own because it's not cool to have your parent around there.
Right.
No,
I've heard,
we're on there,
yeah.
right? You've heard that, right?
Yeah.
So, but this outreach you've had is telling the parents what the kids are going to say.
Correct. And we'll continue to, multiple ways.
So they get notice, and we're going with the kids signing, but in E through 8, both will,
Yes.
the parent will sign on behalf of the kid, and the kid will sign. It's both, right? Or is it parent on behalf?
It is
It's the
parent
parent.
on behalf.
Okay.
And what'll really work, what will really be helpful after this, after a parent and child get used to this, it'll be kind of a natural thing in high school. It's just that it's the first, right, right. But we want them to assume responsibility, so.
Right.
And I know for Naperville North, we got an email about it with the policy attached, and then in the registration packs, all of the policies were attached and explained, and the cover letter referenced them, that this is new. So there was a lot of extra, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. That is not to say that people won't pay attention, but there was a very earnest attempt, there was a very earnest attempt to engage that.
Any other questions or comments? All right, that concludes discussion without action. We'll go on to discussion with action. And these are all policy section 8 that we reviewed last meeting. Are there any, we can take them all as one action, which is how it's set up, or is there anything the board would like pulled for separate discussion?
Just simply say nothing additional to add, and we haven't had any additional questions that have come in aside from what was brought last time. Anything to speak to, Kane?
Only that what's here reflects the feedback provided at the last board meeting related to the initial revisions at first read.
Any questions or comments? Go ahead.
For 8.20, all the items that were taken out are actually part of the application process still. They're just not part of the policy.
100%.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure.
Yep.
Okay, if there's no other discussion, we'll entertain a motion for item 9.01.
I move approval of section, or 9.01 policy revision, second reading of policies section 8 for approval.
Is there a second? Motion and a second for policy 9.01 as presented. Roll call, please.
Fielden,
Yes.
Robert.
Yes.
Waukee.
Yes.
Yench,
Aye.
Fitzgerald,
Aye.
Price.
Yes.
Motion carries. Item 10, new business. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I had an item on this. I think most people know this, that over the last couple of weeks, there have been a lot of discussions on some current board policies, on the state school code, and also the Open Meetings Act to a certain extent. And there's been a lot of confusion and inconsistencies on some of the information that people have heard. And so I was going to suggest, in accordance with 2:160, the portion says that the board may authorize a specific member to confer with legal counsel on its behalf, that we have someone, the president is always authorized to do that, but I think it might be healthy to have someone else in this situation because there's a multitude of questions, basically, that the board authorized a member of ourselves to confer with our legal counsel, specifically Rob Cooper. And I'd go further to suggest it would be helpful if another board member came along. I don't want to use the term witness, but I think having another person there taking notes at the same time would eliminate any doubts about any messages that were heard. So I wanted to throw that out for a board discussion and hopefully concurrence.
Just because it's new business and we have a member who's not here but was agreed to be in, if we could call that person, just because this wasn't something that was on the agenda, please.
Okay, call.
One ringy dingy, two ringy dingy.
Hi, Mrs. Crotty. The board's approved your continued conversation in open session, so you're in the meeting now. We're on item 10.
I'm just going to walk to a quiet spot.
Okay, we're on item 10, new business.
Did you want me to review that?
Yeah, could you, I just don't want somebody to feel like they don't know what's going on.
Okay, Susan, basically what I just asked the board to consider is in accordance with 2:160, the board attorney policy, specifically the part that says the board may authorize a specific member to confer with legal counsel on its behalf. In discussions with some of my members, I've heard a lot of conflicting, or the fact that they have heard conflicting reports on different policies and state laws, specifically legal interpretations of our own board policies, state school code in specific areas, and to a certain extent the Open Meetings Act. I thought it would be a good idea for the board to authorize such a member to confer with Rob Cooper And I further suggested that another board member accompany that member to additionally take notes and have two people listening to the same conversation, still obviously perfectly legal under the Open Meetings Act, and then be able to hopefully close the loop and answer some of these, address some of the confusion that's currently in. What's that?
So are you looking for a vote?
Well, it doesn't necessarily say a vote, but it says the board may authorize. I personally can't imagine why anyone would not want the board to have as many channels open to information as possible. So, I mean, I would suggest that the chair ask if there's any objection, and then we proceed forward, and then it's just simply a question of specifying a specific board member and perhaps another attendee, if that's the will of the board.
Well, I think there needs to be two members, certainly, but I don't, which, you're talking two members other than the president going, who would be the designee initially?
What's that?
Can I ask a question? Can I ask, why wouldn't we invite the attorney to come speak to all of us to address this?
We could do that as well.
I think that
We don't have a meeting and we have questions that we need clarification.
Yeah, I think the conversation, as I understand it, we've waited 2 weeks and 2 weeks. I think it's just a clarification. I think it's a very healthy thing. I wouldn't have thought of the two. I like that a lot. I think that there's not the confusion, and I'll go so far as to ask, I don't know, yes, I do support it. I think it's a good measure, of course. And then I think if there are further questions, have the attorney come. It's fine.
I think, to answer to Susan's question specifically, I think there's two issues: timeliness and also keeping into account that, it's just taking more time out of a public board meeting that we could probably knock out pretty easily and not get Rob here on a Monday night. Not that I'm against that. I have absolutely no problems with that. I'm just trying to expedite the process a little because these things have been floating around for several weeks now.
I think the matter is important enough we could bring the attorney into the room for an open session discussion.
Right, but I'm fine with that. I do not want to wait the 2 weeks, though. I would suggest that if.
Or sometimes 3 weeks.
Right. I would suggest I would suggest that if my fellow board members would agree that this could be done, I don't know people's vacation schedules and all, if it can be done in the next week or so, that would be great. And then you can report back to President, Vice President, or whatever the protocol is.
Well, let's just,
Whoever
I mean,
goes.
if we can put new business, that's something that we want to put on the agenda, but we can't vote on something.
We can't take action.
We can't take action.
This is just directing our individual board action. It's not passing any kind of board resolution or anything.
Are you saying you would not agree to it? Is that what you're saying, Terry?
Well, no, I didn't say that.
I'm just.
No, I'm just trying to clarify what's
I'm looking
being
at
looked
Susan.
for here. Are you looking for some sort of vote, or? And then what would happen with that information? It would get distributed to board members at the next meeting? When would it get distributed? When would the information get distributed to board members?
I'd say as soon as possible.
So does that create any open meetings problems to distribute information that's not?
Well, that would be one of the questions to be answered. In my considered opinion, no, because the Open Meetings Act covers the number of people in a meeting. It does not go to the crux of the matter of what is discussed in that meeting, and information can always be passed one-on-one. What they're trying to avoid, and what they are very stringent about, is more than two people, or a majority of a quorum, to be specific, getting together and discussing board issues contemporaneously and possibly coming to some kind of decision. One-on-one discussions are always allowed.
As long as they're not contemporaneous.
I have a
Correct.
question. Sure. I think in the past, we've all had access to having conversations with our attorney. In fact, Terry, when we were going through construction, you suggested we find an attorney specifically with construction, and that was something that, you had some conversations where they came in and talked with others of us, chew together. So, are you saying, Mike, you want this to be considered general practice and that we're just agreeing that that is appropriate for us?
To answer your question on construction, we did bring in a new attorney for construction, and that was Robin Swartz. It was Ken Flory. But
Right, but you dealt with them specifically
Well, I dealt with him under the capacity of being the chair of the Facilities Committee
But you would have had to have gotten permission
from the board to do that. Because typically,
And I had the opportunity, you know, I was asked to speak with him on something else as well. I mean, so are you asking, Mike, for just, you know, the general consensus of us, that this is how we do business?
well,
And we agree that that's how we do business?
I think typically the president is the one who's been talking to the attorney, and it was accepted that way because we had other board members who were constantly calling the attorney and running up the legal bills. And
But
that,
what if we don't feel that the president is returning this information to everybody, and we feel it's prudent so that we can run the district effectively, that others have access as well?
well, no one's asked me any questions on the Open Meetings Act.
So I guess I'll ask the question of Terry. Terry, would you be agreeable, if it's the sense of the board, to let a designee and a second person talk to our attorney?
I don't have a problem with that.
Great. Thank you. Great. And do we decide now who it is? So just for clarity? Okay. So I will say I would prefer it to be Mike and either Donna or Kristen, but depending on your schedules, so it doesn't get lengthened. And I worry that you're gone. So
I'll volunteer that I have most of the next 2 weeks off.
and then Kristen or
Donna?
Chris or Donna?
Well, I guess it would depend on timing, because I will not be available for part of the next week, so. But I would also say that, the way that I read 2:160 is that the superintendent, his or her designee, or board president are authorized. So I would be comfortable with Terry going to the meeting as well with the lawyer. Because that's who we've designated at this point.
And just to point out, you did read the next sentence too, right? I mean, Terry has already been in contact
Yeah,
with the
see, that's
lawyer.
that's why we're trying to
And part of
gain
the
a different
question
perspective.
is the
I'm not-
information we're getting.
Right, I'm not denying that we can't have two people. I think that's a great idea. I just, my concern is that we already have a designated person, and I think that allowing that person to go as the two people would be pertinent.
I think just to be clear, there's been no questions brought up to me about the Open Meetings Act whatsoever.
And I guess I'll go back, Terry. I don't want to get into all the details. I don't think that's really appropriate right now. So Susan, would you be available? I forgot to ask Susan, but her schedule's kind of crazy. I appreciate. Or Kristen, would you be able in the next week or so to make some time for this?
I definitely can, but I would need to start on the 10th, so that would be like in 1 week. But I can do it, or I could conference in by phone, or I could.
Okay. Okay.
I think someone needs to be there.
Yeah, I do.
I can be there with
Oh,
him.
me too.
I'm available this week.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
I'm available this week.
Okay. Do you know what? If we can say Mike, and we'll find, depending on the attorney's schedule as well.
Sure.
If everybody's agreeable, Mike will go, and the second person will be decided upon based on schedules, but not to elongate this process.
Well, I think
Awesome.
we should agree at the second person now. I think that's reasonable.
I'd like it to be Kristen.
Well, we always have things where it says, you know, like, we changed all of our policies not to have people's names on it. And
Okay.
things like that, so that we're not stuck with, you know,
Kristen, you go on the
Sean
10th?
Smith as the
I can do it on
person.
the 10th, or any day of the
Have
next
it
week.
open so that
That
it
whole
could
following
be.
week.
Okay, I would propose that Mike and Kristen go on the 10th. That'll give us plenty of time before the 17th, should we need to give guidance to our president, vice president, or something.
I still think that
Well, the other way to do it is if there's questions, that those questions can be sent specifically to the attorney, and we ask him to draft a letter that gets returned to everybody. If there's questions, so the visit isn't necessary, the letter, but we can email those, we can come to agreement on those questions and send those to the attorney and have him send a letter to everybody, and then the meeting isn't necessary.
I think it's an excellent
It's
idea.
necessary, Susan. The meeting's necessary. There's information people have that everyone doesn't have.
Conversation with the attorneys can be with the letter that comes back after? Isn't that add to the cost a lot?
I think it's going to cost a lot either way, going through the information. It's probably more than one meeting, depending on Rob's availability.
So I asked the question again, Terry, would you be willing to let 2 members go?
I already said yes, Jackie.
Right, I understand. So I'm just trying to,
I still feel that, I'm willing also to have 2 members go. I just feel like we've already designated the board president, so I would like to have, and if he's not available, then the vice president go as one of the 2.
I think we should all agree on that. All 7 of us should agree on who's going to go. I don't think it needs to be a majority of the board. It's not board action, but I do think all 7 of us need to agree.
I think we're at a point where there's board members that have information that hasn't been shared with other board members. If you'd like me to go into specifics, I will. Suffice it to say, there are board members in a board of equals that are ahead of other board members. I would suggest that we let 2 board members that aren't a part of the presidency or vice presidency be able to come back and report into you. It's my recommendation.
Well, I don't, like I said, on the Open Meetings Act, I don't have anything to offer in that regard. So I can't offer anything. But I think that the 2 people need to be designated here as to who's going to go.
I agree.
If that's what we're going to do.
I think it should be my,
You just designated to make it crystal.
correct.
I don't feel like everybody agreed on that.
Okay?
And why is there objection to Susan Price?
I think Susan has the information you have, Terry. Do you want me to go into details?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll refrain.
Okay.
I think one of the things is, as you've pointed out many times, several times, no one's asking any questions about the Open Meetings Act. I think those points have been brought up by your teammate, and that would be one of the reasons why it may not be appropriate for her to be part of the team visiting the attorney.
Okay, I can see that point. But at the same time, just because she's raised the issue on the Open Meetings Act doesn't mean that she can't sit in a room and listen to what the attorney has to say and still be objective in the matter. Raising a question and being objective are 2 totally different things. Now, the issue here is objectivity. All right. So if it's an objective viewpoint, it's reasonable to ascertain if she's going to sit in front of an attorney and the attorney is going to give an opinion, that she will listen to that opinion and not infer any other answer. Further, most attorneys, when they're asked a question, will give a written opinion on something rather than do a verbal, just to avoid any conflict of interest on that. So this is a series of questions that are going to be asked of the attorney as you go through, and the attorney is going to give answers. So I don't know how questioning the Open Meetings Act prior to going to see the attorney has any bearing on being objective.
I would also point out that you set unilaterally a very high bar of unanimity of 2 people, and do you have a grounds for that?
What do you mean by unanimity?
You just stated that you think it should be unanimous as far as selecting the 2 people. That's not written anywhere in our policy, and I'm just asking what the logic and grounds for that is.
I'm just thinking in this case, it's most practical that the board go down that road for that reason, that's all.
But you're not going to get that.
Well, okay, I'm not going to get that. So then there's also, but by inference, the same question of objectivity comes into play. Now, whether or not the 2 sides are antagonistic at the table has no bearing. In fact, there may be some measure of antagonism that helps balance the questions and balance in hearing the answers, which again are going to be in writing.
Terry, I do believe that for reasons that things just haven't flowed as well in the last few weeks or the last month, Rob should be invited to the meeting on the 17th. Let's do the belt and suspenders approach. I have absolutely no problem with that. Let's have these questions be addressed that haven't been able to get addressed or everybody hasn't been able to hear. Everybody hasn't been heard or hasn't heard, and let's ask Rob to come on the 17th. I think it's a great idea.
We can do that.
Great. So I would say again, I would recommend Michael and Kristen go and ask our attorney if he's available at some point on the 17th.
So they're gonna
with you, Jackie.
go to his office and ask him if he's available on the 17th?
I think they can be mutually exclusive. set up the 17th, Terry or Dan or whomever, Terry designates, can set up the 17th, but we're not going to wait till the 17th for those answers.
And so the answers, no, and the answers are going to get distributed via a letter from Rob. They're going to ask the questions, and he's going to prepare a letter and send it to everybody? Send it to the board?
You have to send it to the superintendent, who would have to.
Send to the superintendent,
Who would have
get
to distribute it to
distributed.
the board.
Okay.
But the questions would be the same at both the meeting with the attorney and the meeting in open session.
And if we don't need the meeting in open session on the 17th, we don't need it, but it's there in case we need it.
It's
I think
fine.
that's a nice safeguard. Okay?
Okay. Donna? I think it's okay.
So, okay, so are we all in agreement, are we all agreeing with Mike and Kristen then? Is that what I'm making sure I'm hearing?
All right, that's fine. Any old business?
Watch, Rob will be on vacation. Rob will be on vacation.
He currently is. I'm not sure when he'll return, but. Find out. Yep.
Okay, August 19th. Moving on to old business. Anybody have any old business? No? 12.01, schedule events, a couple weeks. A lot of happy kids come back to school.
Really? Can you guarantee
I'd like to
that?
highlight just one other thing for our community, just a reminder, especially for new community members who may be watching, our Welcome to 203 Picnic, Community Picnic, is being held on August 29th, 2015. I think the time is actually 4 o'clock to 6. I think we have 3 in there for a little setup, but so the actual
Yeah, I
time
think
is
3 is probably the setup for our volunteers. Yeah.
So volunteers set up at 3. The actual event begins at 4 and runs till 6 o'clock. A number of community partners will be present.
Okay, no other discussion on the events. Would entertain a motion to adjourn? Wait, oh, good, that's right, sorry. We're going to go back, the board's going to go back. We're not going to adjourn at this time. Board's going to go back into closed session to finish discussion on. Are we going to do anything else besides investments?
No, I think, Terry, you have to say that there won't be a report out.
Right, but to go back into closed session, does the board wish to discuss anything else in closed session besides investments? Okay. When we return from closed session, there'll be no more action by the board. It will be an immediate adjournment. So, and we will go back into closed session for the sale or purchase of securities, investments, or investment contracts. Can I have a motion for that?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second?
Roll call.
Romberg,
Yes.
Fielden,
Yes?
Fitzgerald,
Aye.
Price,
Yes.
Crotty,
Yes.
Yench,
Hi.
Wonky, yes.
Do we want to
Susan, will you be joining us?
I think she said no.
I will not.
Okay. Good night.
We're enclosed.
Are you back on the 10th or only the 10th?
I can do the whole entire week. I'm back on the evening of the 9th. I have the whole entire week. I mean, I have soccer carpools, but I can get some. I'll pay
Soccer
some
Goebbels?
carpools.
Oh, you said soccer Goebbels. Is that?
Carpools, but I can